All right. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me all right? All right. Well, welcome to the May 7th, 2020, Thursday morning, May 7th, VC Ag Today session. Appreciate everybody joining us this morning. Today's topic is going to be commercial vegetable production, and we're pleased to be joined by two Virginia Cooperative Extension and Virginia Tech specialists this morning, Dr. Tom Kuhar, our Extension entomologist, and Dr. Steve Rideout, Extension plant pathologist. And they're going to share some updates with us this morning from some of their research and developments that they've had in commercial vegetable production. So before we get started this morning, just a couple of quick rules. For the security of the meeting, we've muted all of our participants this morning. And we've also put some other security measures in place, so hopefully the meeting won't be compromised. In the event that that does occur, we'll end the meeting as quickly as possible and be in touch with everyone as to how we'll proceed forward to get this update and information to everyone that's joining us this morning. We'll have our speakers present as usual, and then at the end, we'll open up the floor for questions and comments to hopefully facilitate a discussion this morning. So with that being said, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. If you have questions during the presentation, you could just jot those down or put them into the chat box, and then we will address those questions or comments at the end one by one. Other than that, I guess we'll go ahead and get started this morning. So Dr. Kuhar, we appreciate you joining us. We'll go ahead and get started with you this morning. And I believe we've got you unmuted, so you're good to go. And if you have a presentation, Dr. Kuhar, we'd be glad to allow you to share the screen for that as well. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. Can everybody hear me, or can someone who can answer hear me?
We got you loud and clear, Dr. Kuhar.
Okay, I've got the host disabled participant screen sharing, so I think that's got to be opened up as well, Robbie.
Should be good to go now.
Yep, you should have it, Tom.
Okay. Okay, does that look good?
Great, perfect.
All right. All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to start with this slide right here because it's a question that I get almost every year, usually sometime in the month of March or April. We definitely had a warm winter. I don't care where you are in Virginia. It was warm enough that it's going to probably impact insects. Now, you know, I would be a fool to say I can predict which insects are going to be high or low, but there are definitely some things when we don't have these severe freezing temperatures, you know, like when a polar vortex or something like that comes through, because we are situated where we are in Virginia, we're kind of on that borderline of a southern state and you know, you get into the mountains, it's a little more like the Northeast. Because we're kind of on that cusp, you know, right on that border, that the winter really can drive some things, and just a couple things to be aware of, and then I'm going to talk about some insecticide updates and how they might impact some of these insects that I'm mentioning. But you know, you're going to get higher survival, overwintering survival of insects. That's because it doesn't reach those levels that are going to be deadly to the insects. More are going to survive. That's a fact. So, you know, insects like corn earworm, you know, that's one that's right now a pupa in the soil. You can see it to the right. And that's one that, you know, in a cold winter, we're not going to get many overwintering corn earworms. Most of them are going to come up from the south and get here later. I would bet we will have a good mix of Virginia corn earworms this year that just survived in that pupal stage. Some insects are going to get a lot earlier start. So thrips are definitely one of them. These are insects that if you have a lot of winter annual weeds, which I'm guessing, especially in Southside Virginia or some other areas, that there was just a lot of flowering weeds that might have been around throughout the winter. The thrips thrive on that. They can build up their populations and then be ready come springtime to start moving on to some of those early vegetable seedlings that are coming out. And then you got insects like harlequin bug. This is a southern pest. And this southern pest definitely, overwintered here in Virginia, and whether it survived the winter is going to be dependent upon temperature. So I would bet you're going to have the southern pest did very well in some brassica fields. So these are some things early that we might be keeping a watch on. I'm going to get into some. Let me move this thing out of my way. I've got that kind of right in the way where I wanted to talk. There's been some, as many of you are aware, some big time shakeups in the agrochemical industry, some big mergers like DuPont and Dow, two powerhouses have become Corteva. And because of that, FMC acquired a lot of pesticides, especially insecticides that were from those companies. Then you had the Bayer and Monsanto merger. So these are some big things. So what does this mean? Why am I even bringing this up? Well, there's not a lot of new insecticide products. Steve Rideout can I don't know what he's going to say about fungicides, but because there was all this big time mergers and things, the companies were not moving forward with some product development. We probably are going to see that down the road, but there was a lot of other things they were worried about. And, so we've not seen a lot of new stuff come out. I would like to talk about Lorsban. This is or chlorpyrifos. This is an insecticide that last year I was betting that we were going to lose it. It was going to be gone. Just seemed like the writing was on the wall. The political movements were definitely that this thing's got to go. It's an older organophosphate, and the EPA surprisingly did not ban it. They're going to revisit this in 2022, but for now, from a legal standpoint, with the EPA, Lorsban, is as usual. However, the company Corteva now that manufactures Lorsban, they're no longer going to make it. So that's the primary company, but there's so many generic formulations of chlorpyrifos, and those, I have no idea where they're being made, but they're being made somewhere, and you can get on the dang internet and buy a jug of chlorpyrifos. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's got all kinds of names, and growers can still get it, and it's generic. So that's kind of the status with that one. A lot of people had some questions about that. And one area that is expanding is the diamides. These have been around for about 10 years now. Have really fit in well with vegetable production because they're extremely safe for mammals, and a lot of non-target effects as well. Coragen was probably one of the most popular ones, but we have a lot more now. I'll talk about Verimark in a minute. Arvanta is a new diamide that's come out. The latter ones that have come out since Coragen are a little more broad spectrum. They're not just killing leps. They're killing some other insects that fit in, but still bringing a lot of the reduced non-target effects. And Syngenta's got a whole slew of products that mix a diamide that's in Coragen with some of their other insecticides, like neonicotinoids. You can have a transplant drench or chemigation with Derivo. Besiege is a very, very popular product. It's got diamide plus lambda cyhalothrin pyrethroid. So this is a big market for vegetables, and diamides I think have a really big fit because of their safety profile. Okay, going to get into, this is a slide that I forgot who sent it to me, but it came from the northern neck of Virginia. And this is a problem that's happening early season. It's happening around Virginia. This is, obviously a transplant that's dying of something. If you pulled that up, this is a culprit that's happening. These are maggots that are crawling out of that. It's cabbage maggot. and obviously, that's a pretty significant deal after you've planted, your seedlings start to die. And problem is, at that point, there's nothing you can do. Just a little bit about this pest. It's a tiny fly, smaller than a housefly, but otherwise kind of a slender housefly looking thing. It flies around. The peak time that the adults are active mating and laying eggs in fields is when the wild mustards or wild radish are flowering. So when you see that happening and you're planting, you kind of know that there's going to be flies around. They like kind of high organic matter, and moist springs, it can be a lot of a problem too, because the plant's not growing, but the flies are developing very well. I brought that one up because the whole chlorpyrifos issue, it was arising last year, and it looked like that was an insecticide. So I was even asked, how important is chlorpyrifos? Do we have alternatives? I was actually asked that direct question. And my answer was, we do have alternatives, but there are some pests, some very specific situations where there is nothing better than chlorpyrifos left for growers, and cabbage maggot is one of those. It's just as a really, really effective insecticide. It works fantastic as a soil insecticide. Lorsban does. So that is one that if you put that down pre-plant, really can alleviate those cabbage maggot problems that you don't know when it's going to happen. So having something that can last, that you can put down preventatively. So that was an insight. That's why I brought that one up. Some alternatives include switching to a pyrethroid like bifenthrin or Verimark, the diamide, and I'll talk a little bit about the latter, Verimark. So this is one that is starting to, when it first came out, it was a bit expensive, and I don't think a lot of growers were adopting it. But now, you have issues like Lorsban. You have maybe the price coming down a little bit, and this is an alternative. It's just more expensive. So, and it's a lot safer to mammals and beneficial insects. So I'm going to move on to talking about neonicotinoids, because this one's not going away. It seems like every meeting that I go to, there's discussion about neonics that's been going on for about a good 10 years now. So, yeah, many of you know what they are. Some of the popular products that Admire, Platinum, some that you may not be as familiar with, but probably should, are the dinotefurons, Venom, Scorpion, and I'm going to get to those in a second. Clothianidin is primarily a seed treatment, but Belay is a vegetable product as well. And Asail, which is active ingredient acetamiprid, is much different than the other neonics. One, it's not systemic. It's not applied, as a soil insecticide. It's just foliar. But the other big thing is it's over 100-fold less toxic to bees than other neonics. So it has its niche. Okay, where are we with this neonic situation? Just kind of throw down just some bullet points. One, they still are the most commonly used insecticide class in the world. Why is that? Well, one, because of their systemic nature and how well they work as seed treatments and soil drenches, and because of their incredibly low mammalian toxicity, that 1-2 punch has allowed them to just fit into all kinds of niches, and vegetables being a definite one. Research has shown that, yes, a soil-applied neonic can end up in pollen and nectar, although the levels are extremely low. And that probably the greatest risk to pollinators is the foliar sprays, and legislation has tried to cut that down. It's been on it's been on a lot of neonic labels from the get-go. You should not be applying these when plants are in bloom, but people did, and when they did, neonics got banned. So that's the issue with the bees. It's just, if you follow the directions, it's less of a concern. But there's been some new research that has just shown that because we've used so many of them so often on the same soils, we're starting to build up levels. And what do those levels of an insecticide mean? I think these are long-term studies that are just starting to show that this is probably not the best idea. Whenever we just start dumping things preventatively, regularly into the environment, it often comes back to haunt us. And I think that's where we're at with neonics. It's just the sheer Overuse of them is probably going to come back to haunt them and us. So because of that, some countries and states, obviously you're aware of this, have banned their use. However, there's a lot of research that has shown that in areas where they've banned their use, there's been increased use of more broad spectrum and probably more damaging insecticides. So you got to spray them more often. So has it been a good thing or a bad thing? You know, that's up for debate. The other big concern with vegetable growers is that, you know, regardless of how you feel about them, if your market where you're selling is not going to allow neonics to be used on the produce, then it's going to hurt you in a big way. You can't use them at all if you want to sell there. So it's a big topic, one that's not going away, one that just seems to keep changing. But I just like to remind people of just really what they are. You know, you can kind of have your own opinions of them, but they have filled a niche in vegetables, and one that I don't know whether too many other things have, or we have replacements for it. Just an example, Colorado potato beetle. So the larvae will absolutely devour plants in areas of Virginia. You won't have any plants left on the Eastern Shore if you plant without treating for Colorado potato beetle. These are all neonicotinoids, platinum, admire venom, put down on the seed piece at just a really low rate. And, you know, we're up at 70, 80 days after planting, and still, you know, just extremely low numbers of potato beetles on those plants. It just still works very, very well. That, by the way, that tactic for controlling potato beetles replaced several sprays of carbamates and organophosphates that growers were using prior to that. So, you know, just that was kind of a, you know, to see where neonics have fit in vegetables. I think people have to have an appreciation for it, you know, as we're talking about legislation restricting their use. And here's another one, cucumber beetles. This is one that, again, that what's this winter going to mean? Probably more cucumber beetles. The adults overwinter, and they come out of leaf litter or field residue, and males will find plants and call in other beetles with their aggregation pheromone, and pretty soon you get a field that's just devoured by these things. Really, really hard to spray. Really, really hard to watch your field and know when they come in and to time it, and to spray little tiny seedlings with a foliar spray. So, you know, here's just some more, and the cucumber beetles can come back and feed on the fruit later. Some plants are susceptible to bacterial wilt. So I don't have to convince most people that cucumber beetles are a big deal, but what neonics have meant to cucurbit production, to be able to put a little bit of transplant drench of a neonicotinoid and to have protection for about 30 to 45 days against this beetle and the bacterial wilt that it can transmit has been tremendous. And putting it down that early, it's just really, really minuscule levels in the parts per billion that's going to end up in the flowers later. So, you know, it has its fit, it has its role still. And, you know, putting it on as a seed treatment like Farmore F400, you're basically buying seeds like pumpkin seeds, and you're already protected against cucumber beetles for about 3 weeks after planting. So I'm just giving you examples. Flea beetles, these are a number early season pests. Had a student researching them, and they can certainly do a lot of defoliation. Brassicas are attacked, and as well as things like eggplant. These are different flea beetles that attack those two classes of vegetables, but they both do the same thing, which is they can cause yield loss. That early feeding defoliation hurts you later. The research by my student, James Mason, has shown that if you let that feeding damage get past 25% in that seedling, it's gonna affect yield later. If you put a soil drench down when you put your eggplant transplants or your brassica transplants, you know, you're getting really, really good control of those flea beetles. And what I wanted to show you on this slide, here's two neonicotinoids, Admire Pro and Venom, and Verimarx the diamide. You can just see where Venom, which is dinotefuran, is kind of lasting up into the middle of June. These were transplants that went down on 22nd of May. That's better than we're getting out of Admire Pro. So if you've not considered dinotefuran as a neonicotinoid. It does seem to last longer in some systems. I'm going to just talk about another one. Stink bugs are another one, and neonics actually work very well against stink bugs. This is harlequin bug I mentioned earlier. This kind of southern bug pest that can really attack the brassicas. And I had a student, and yeah, the same neonicotinoids and especially dinotefuran can give you, a good almost a month or sometimes over a month control against these bugs, which is just a really really good way to go for some growers, but there's still the concerns over neonicotinoids. So so if you don't use them, if for whatever you've decided, nope, I'm against these or I cannot use these, more so than not, you're probably going to switch to sprays of pyrethroids, which do kill those same pests I just went through, except for Colorado potato beetle, but they do get the job done. They're foliar sprays, and there's a lot of them out there, and they're cheap. What's the drawback? The drawback is huge. You are going to kill a lot of natural enemies, a lot of non-target insects that research is showing. I mean, you've got some growers that are planting flowers to enhance these populations of these organisms. And then you got to think that the best thing you can do is not spray a pyrethroid, because that's just going to wipe them out. So if you just let them come, don't do things like that, they will help contribute and do their services, which is often eating a lot of the pests and keeping their populations down. So there is definitely a trade-off. You've got this pyrethroid versus neonicotinoid argument, and here's just a look at mammalian toxicity in case you didn't know or were wondering. Here's lambda-cy, very popular pyrethroid, and there's imidacloprid, admire, and there's your rat dermal and rat oral, and the neonics are safer, bottom line, than a lot of the pyrethroids, and they're both highly toxic to bees. So let's assume you're going without any of those insecticides. What are some other things that you can do early season for some of those insects, cucumber beetles, flea beetles? You can go with row covers. Depending on the grower and their situation, this is something that is possible. There's some upfront costs. There's a lot of labor. There's storage of these things, but you're basically covering your plants and protecting them early on when they kind of need it the most. And obviously you got to take these things off at some point, that definitely before flowering, but definitely when the plants just start to get some size to them. And they usually can tolerate feeding by that point. So this is for smaller growers. This is a tactic that can replace either of those insecticide uses. I'm going to talk about a couple more things here. And one is that, okay, what if we go with a foliar spray? One, personally, I think we should have gotten rid of all foliar sprays of neonicotinoids, just because I think the at-planting systemic use of them makes so much sense from a pollinator protection and also effectiveness, that why even bother with messing with spraying these things when plants could be blooming? There are alternatives. A sail is a different story. That's a neonic that's 100 times less toxic to bees, much safer option to spray as a foliar. And you are starting to see a lot of chemicals come out that are very neonic-like. They're in an insecticide IRAC class 4, just like neonics, but they're not considered neonicotinoids. They're a little bit different. And Savanto is one of those products. What are they bringing? Well, they're a lot less toxic to bees, and then otherwise do a lot of the same things that neonicotinoids do. So these options are out there for foliar sprays. So aphids are another insect that was commonly killed by neonicotinoids. And I wanted to just put this one up. I'm not going to go through in detail, but there are so many classes of chemistry now that control aphids extremely well, aphids and whiteflies, that are a lot more IPM friendly, a lot safer. So there's better things to be spraying than a neonic as a foliar. So I'm going to end with one last slide here. Don't know how I've done with my time. I think I've done okay. There's a lot of new organic insecticides that are coming out on the market, and this is really, really good for organic growers. Some exciting stuff. So I'm going to end with that and turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhar. We appreciate your updates. And we've got a couple questions there in the chat, but we'll hold those to the end after Dr. Rideout's presentation. Steve, are you with us this morning?
I am here, so ready to go.
All right. I think we've got you as a co-host, so you should have the capacity to share your screen if you've got some slides.
Okay. Let me see if I can get that going here. Okay, is everybody okay? Can they see my screen all right?
We can see it, Steve.
Okay, fantastic. So what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about diseases, but since we don't have a lot of disease pressure right now, and disease is kind of variable at times, what I was going to do was talk a little bit about resources and where you can find disease information. Like I said, in vegetables, we've had very little so far. Of course, we've had some crops planted, some crops not. A couple of warnings: if you haven't made your decisions on which cultivars you're going to plant, this is a year when you want to look at virus resistance. For example, if you're planting tomatoes and you're in Tidewater, you probably want to get some tomatoes that are tomato spotted wilt resistant. If you're planting pumpkins, same thing. Basically, the reasoning for this is we had, and Tom kind of touched on this, we really had a mild winter, and we had a lot more overwintering of insects than normal. And increased insects means more viral issues. So, yeah, that's just kind of what happens. So pay attention to that more than normal. I think just as importantly, and Tom touched on this as well, is the need for seed treatments. One, just because of the insect part of it, but also for disease. We've been relatively warm, although our soil temperatures are probably going to take a hit this weekend. But we've had a lot of moisture in the ground. So, putting bare seeds or seeds with minimal seed treatments is probably going to result in some damping off or poor emergence issues this year. With that being said, you want to focus on certified seed transplants. It really, as far as disease management goes, seed treatment, certified seed, certified transplants, resistant cultivars, these are things that really get you going on a good start for the year. And finally, I just want to mention late blight, cucurbit downy mildew. These are two really devastating diseases that we monitor as vegetable plant pathologists, and just want to let you know we do not have any of those threats so far. Late blight is confined to Florida, and quite frankly, those are kind of older outbreaks. And then cucurbit downy mildew is reported most recently in South Georgia, but still quite a ways away from us. So that's what I had on disease. We, of course, monitor things, and should you need an alert, we'll send that out. Resource overview of vegetable production in Virginia. This is a presentation that Mark and I put together a few months ago. We get so many questions about our vegetable production gods in Virginia. And I just wanted to go over a little bit about them. One, this is the Mid-Atlantic Commercial Vegetable Production God. And this booklet is what I would consider our primary production God. If you're growing commercial vegetables, this is the God that I would recommend you utilizing. And you can see we're all involved in this. We do this in conjunction with the Mid-Atlantic states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia. And it's basically a joint effort, has been for, as long as I can remember. You can go online, view this, at the Virginia Tech VCE portal there. It's updated yearly. Once that gets updated, it's static. We only do the updates once a year for now. That may change going forward, though. And the other God is actually the Southeastern Vegetable Production God. This is, it's a little bit wider range of states that work on this. And some of these states actually have their own production gods in conjunction with this. But this is a group that, again, extends out to Texas, Oklahoma. We have people in Florida that work on it as well. But we are involved in this production god. Both Tom and I actually went to this meeting last summer. That's also available on the site. You can go access that as well. And it's updated annually also. But we actually have the ability to go in, fix errors, make changes, do updates if need be. So one thing that I wanted to mention, particularly from a disease and insect standpoint, there's a major difference in these two books and how we list products and recommend products. And I get probably about 10, 15 questions a year that are along these lines of the Mid-Atlantic says this, but the Southeastern God says this. So I wanted to go over that a little bit today. The Mid-Atlantic, if you see something listed in there, it means that we have faith in those materials. While the Southeast guys just list all materials that are labeled, and we'll go through an example on this. In the Mid-Atlantic, we kind of list things in order of efficacy. So the best materials are going to be at the top or listed first. And then Southeast, it's alphabetical. But we'll go through this. And I'm going to use cucumber downy mildew as an example. Very prolific disease that we have a lot of resistance problems with. So this snippet here is from the Mid-Atlantic God under cucumbers. And you can see where we have a little bit of information about it, and then we list the materials that we recommend. The materials on top here, like Arundus Ultra, Randman, these are the materials we feel best about. As you go down that list, these are materials that we are less sure of or have less belief in working the best. So if you look at cucumber downy mildew and the Southeastern God, they're going to list all the products that are labeled for downy mildew. So these are all the products that have ever had a label for cucumber downy mildew. I'll give you an example of something that used to work, but there are resistance problems, and that's Quadris. So if you look at the Southeastern God and you just rely on looking at this listing, you would see Quadris here. Quadris hasn't worked in, since 2003 on cucumber downy mildew. But if you're used to the Mid-Atlantic God and you look at the Southeastern God and you see Quadris, you think, oh, well, they recommend it. Well, that's not the case. It's just listed there because it still has downy mildew on the label. What you have to do in the Southeastern God is go to an accompanying efficacy table and try to find Quadris, which here's Quadris. And if you look under downy mildew, it says it's no control. So both gods are correct. It's just a different way in which you go about obtaining your information. And you have to know where that is. And here's, those are pesticides, but if you want to know about cultural practices for managing diseases. You basically have these tables. Some of them have, some don't. But here's an alternative management practices for cucurbits. And you could go in and you can actually see downy mildew. And you can see, okay, well, changing the planting date does pretty good. It helps out destroying residue. You can kind of find what works, resistant cultivars. You get a pretty good idea of what some of your other practices besides fungicides are. That information is also in the Mid-Atlantic Guide. It's just contained within these paragraphs, these text paragraphs that you see preceding listing of fungicides. Just a few other differences. Southeastern Guide groups crop types together. Cucurbits is a single group, while the Mid-Atlantic Guide separates out into 5 different sections: cucumber, melon, watermelon, squash, and pumpkin. Southeastern Guide contains the following, not found in the Mid-Atlantic: hops, Jerusalem artichoke, and tomatillo. Mid-Atlantic is your place to go to if you grow horseradish, leeks, and strawberries is also found in the Mid-Atlantic Guide and not in the Southeast. Now, that's because most Southeastern states have their own strawberry production guide too. So, the other thing to be cognizant of, disease and insect pressure differs between the two regions, particularly based upon where you are. If you're in the Shenandoah Valley, you're going to find some things in the Southeastern Guide that you don't have to worry about, and vice versa. If you're right on the North Carolina border, it's more likely that you will have similar type pest problems. The other thing is, resistance issues are a little bit more common in the South. So, they may be taking into account resistance problems that we do not have. So again, that's 2 books, 1 Commonwealth. The info is fairly similar. You just have to be really careful and cognizant when you switch between the two of the way that the information is presented. The last few years, we've seen more utilizations of both of these guides and gotten a lot of questions, and there's been some confusion. So one of the things that I focused on this winter was to try to talk a little bit about this and get everybody up to speed on what's going on with them. If you are a gardener or homeowner and you are not growing commercially, but of course it's people's gardens are pretty serious in Virginia. We've had a long history of appreciating our gardens. So you have the Home Grounds and Animals publication, and that'll give you more recommendations that are specifically meant for homeowners and home grounds. So with that, that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Dr. Wright. I would appreciate the presentation and that good information on those two publications with all the data. So I guess I'll move back real quick. We had a couple of questions and comments in the chat box, and I think some of the folks there, Tom Kuhar and Taylor Clark, they answered some questions for some folks in the chat box. But for those of you that are joining us via telephone and can't read the chat box, one of the questions was, will the cold snap this weekend do anything to insect populations? And I think Dr. Kuhar answered that, as the cold spell now is not really going to be cold enough to harm most insects. So, maybe not very effective on that. The second question was, how many cabbage maggot generations can we expect in a year? And Dr. Kuhar answered that as well, as they have multiple generations and can be a problem later in the year as well. And then the final question that we had in the chat box, I believe, was, are there organic alternative pesticides for cucumber or potato beetles? And there was a response there that some of the OMRI certified spinosad products, such as Entrust, can work great. Pyganic doesn't stick around very long, less than a day's residual. So I guess Dr. Kuhar, if you've got any questions you'd like to add to that comment, feel free to add those comments now. And I'll just continue to look down through some of these comments in the chat box to see what would be pertinent.
Yeah, I kind of wrote it in there. And trust, if you're an organic grower, that is one powerful, naturally derived biological insecticide. And it really works well against the lepidopteran pests. It's probably one of our best materials for corn earworm. Definitely for an organic grower, because the BTs aren't working very well. So you got your lepidopterans. It's our #1 insecticide for thrips, and it gets things like Colorado potato beetle, flea beetles very well. So it's just I think just a really powerful tool for organic growers. And all the other ones, you're going to see a big reduction in efficacy. You're going to get a little bit, but it might be a challenge, and you might need repeat applications. Some of the azadirachtin type, some of the oils and things like that. So that's just kind of a general answer based on my experience with the organic insecticides.
And I see you also had a comment there about the listing of some of the insecticides in the Mid-Atlantic Vegetable Recommendation book, that's a little bit different than some of the fungicides for diseases and stuff. Do you just want to touch on that real quick as well?
Yeah, I'll one, I would like to say I applaud the plant pathologists for listing their fungicides in order of how they believe would be the most effective, and then moving down the line. That the entomologists were asked to do that as well, and we basically said we don't put things in the book that don't work. So we're just kind of splitting hairs to pick one over the other, and it was more of an issue. And we've got, just for a lot of these pests, we've got like neonics and pyrethroids, and like they all work. So we just found it to be I think it's a lot more clear in some of these diseases like downy mildew, where you definitely get effective, moderately effective, and then just not very effective at all. So we didn't do that, and now we've got a book that's got fungicides listed one way, and then when you look at the insecticides, we're wondering, we don't want growers to say, oh, I'm going to use the first one listed because that's actually a group 1. We list them by insecticide class numerically. So group 1 is the organophosphates. So most of the time we don't want to be recommending those, and they're listed first. And I realize that's probably logically not a good idea. So we're going to fix this, Steve.
Yeah, the problem, and this is me and Tom bemoaning this, but this group used to meet annually in Newark, Delaware, and we used to meet as a group for weed science. The weed scientists were always kind of broken off. They had another event, but we met entomology, pathology, et cetera, and we've not done that in the last couple of years. So I knew that they had, or we had talked about you guys doing that, but I honestly, I didn't know. So, but so that's good to know. So,
but we should get it consolidated, and I say we've probably got to move more towards what you've done, because I like the logical nature of it. That let's put the best recommendation first.
It's really tough. It's not easy to do that, and there are instances where what we kind of constructed, is not always the case sometimes too. So it's not easy, but the main, like I said, the main thing I wanted to talk about today was just the difference between the two guys, because that's really, as we've seen the Southeast God gain more traction than Virginia, we've really seen the problems associated with that, or the confusion associated, I shouldn't say problems.
And I see we also had a comment there from Taylor Clark recommending Rutgers has a guide that's broken into sections and could be easier for referencing with a phone. So thanks, Taylor. Appreciate that advice. If you're interested in that, you could probably find that online on Rutgers' website. And then also I see we had one more comment from Taylor about using spinosad if we use that multiple times in a season. Is there concern of resistance development? Could you touch on that a little bit, Dr. Kuhar?
Sure. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, one, the label itself will prevent you from putting it out more than 2 or 3 times based on the rate that you use. So there's a max out that you can't get to. But the concern, you know, if you spray it on, so say you're planting a bunch of brassicas, you know, almost year round in some instances, you know, you might have put it 2 times on one crop and now you're putting it on 2 times on this. And then now you got fall broccoli and you're going to put 2 times. Now you've just put that thing out multiple times. And yes, it absolutely is a concern for our number one insect we're worried about is diamondback moth, which has in some places developed resistance to spinosad. So yes, it's a great question. Watch out with the brassicas of using that one too much, and it's always good to rotate chemistries. So yeah, really good point.
All right, well, I guess at this time, we'll go ahead and we'll unmute everyone. If you have a lot of background noise where you're joining us from this morning, if you wouldn't mind just going in and muting yourself again once we unmute you. But we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions and comments from our clients and folks that are participating with us this morning. So give me just 1 second here to go in and unmute folks. And if you have questions as well, you can continue to put those in the chat box and address those. All right, I believe everyone has been unmuted. So do we have any other questions for our speakers this morning?
It is
What time?
May 19th at 12 o'clock.
All right, well, I'm not hearing any more questions or comments. So I guess with that, looking in the chat box here, we've got a comment from Dr. Rideout. He says another good resource for pesticides with updated labels is cdms.net. That's cdms.net. Thanks for that, Dr. Rideout. I have used that a lot myself, and that is a really great resource.
Yeah, it's the most up to date one. You know, they're pretty good about including everything that needs to be.
Thank you, Miss Marshall.
All right. Well,
I made a guinea pig. For for the home gardener or the small gardener that's doing a lot of just hand planting of transplants, whether it's brassicas or the other things that the neonics would be a benefit to them. How would you suggest them utilizing the products like Admire in that? You know, is it I know from a research standpoint, we always just, you know, mixed up a solution, figured out our rate, and after we transplanted the plants, we poured it around the plant. Is that something that in those situations would work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, I will say they do make some home garden products. It's often a lot less concentrated than like an Admire or some of the more commercial ag. the trade-off is, you know, in order to buy them, you're buying an amount that's way more than any home gardener needs. But let's just say they got their hands on some. Yeah, absolutely. A good rule of thumb, and I can't believe I'm saying this on air because it was just kind of a passed on to me, but Herman Holt was a wise vegetable horticulturist when I was first started, got hired at the Eastern Shore ARAC, and he taught me what, you know, I was wrestling with that because I had these rates per acre on the pesticides, and then a homeowner would call or they said they have some and they want to treat a few plants, and I'm like, oh geez, how do I? He told me that it's basically the ounces per acre is roughly the equivalent of a mils per gallon. So if you look on that rate and it is giving you you know, ounces per acre, that if you mix that for, you know, like a home gardener, a gallon for putting in a water pail or something, then that works really well. And it does. That's about the right equivalent. Kind of a rough estimate. So that's what I've used. Now, you know, again, these are some things that aren't legal to do those, because that product that was sold for commercial purposes. But you know, it is what it is.
Thanks, Taylor. I think that was a really pertinent question. I kind of was thinking the same thing myself. You know, I know there's some folks out there, you know, that kind of find themselves stuck in between a home gardener but a commercial grower at the same time. So, you know, they do have those types of questions of how could they use those products and get, you know, the correct rates and that type of thing. So thanks for asking that. We got one more question there. Are there certain vegetable commodities where preventative tactics could or should be used to manage incoming or later season pests?
Yep. And Katie, when you say pest, that can be diseases or insects, but for diseases, it's certainly the case. You know, prevention is a big part of what we do in disease control. So there, you know, you need to have some form of preventative program in terms of, you know, preventing disease. Cultivar selection, again, is really big, particularly if you're going to grow something like cucumbers in the fall. They will get absolutely annihilated with downy mildew in certain parts of the state. So making sure that you use cultivars that are resistant or tolerant, I should say, to downy mildew is important if you're growing, you know, fall cucumbers. And I think the viruses are really important this year. You know, I haven't seen that play out yet, but I would be surprised if we don't see a tick up. I think Tom and I both are on board and a little bit concerned with that. You know, what we're going to have there. So, and there are a number of other, you know, ways you can do. And the production guides have a lot of information, both in those tables in the Southeastern Guide and also in the narrative in the others. So, in the Mid-Atlantic.
All right, thanks, Dr. Rideout. Any other questions or comments for our specialists this morning?
Well, Robbie and Laura and Steph and, you know, the other extension agents that might be on here, I think Steve and I both agree that we really like this platform to at least share some things, and I think keeping it like this is early season focus, having some things, you know, maybe later in the summer. I really like it. I like the ability to kind of interact, get some questions from you and get some discussions. And, you know, we're all finding that these are different ways of interacting than maybe we're used to. We used to have these meetings in the winter and, you know, it's just one PowerPoint after another. I'm all for these things. I welcome them, and I think Steve is as well. So, you know, keep them up, and, you know, let's bring some growers in to these things. I think it's a really good platform. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhar. We really appreciate you and Dr. Rideout for joining us this morning and taking that opportunity, you know, to share these updates with producers. I think we've got some on the phone with us this morning, and we also record these, so we'll post them out, you know, for producers if they happen to be in the field today. You know, they can get this information later. But thank you both for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. I also like to take a couple of minutes to just thank all the other colleagues of mine, the agents that I work with that help make this effort possible. You know, Stephanie Romelchek in Westmoreland, Trent Jones in Northumberland, Lancaster County, Laura Maxine in Hanover, and Mike Broadus in Caroline. Just like to thank them for all their help. You know, this is a collaborative effort, and we're glad that it's, you know, hopefully benefiting some folks. And just like to thank everyone that joined us this morning, you know, taking some time to come in and get these updates and ask questions, your input. It helps everyone, I think. So you see there, if you have the capacity to see the screen, we do have these every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. So we'll continue to have those at least for the foreseeable future. You can either join us by phone or by online using the links there. I'd like to go ahead and announce we are going to have next week, our topic is going to be weeds and an update from our weed specialist, Dr. Michael Flessner. So that's going to be our topic next week and our speaker for that. So I think Laura sent in the chat box, she sent everyone a little flyer with some information on that. So if you take a look at that, you can see that. And we'll also post that information and get it out to everyone as well. So just thank you all to everything that you do. Thank you for joining us this morning. And, you know, you can also find the recordings of these presentations at the link there on the screen. And we'll also be sending those out there posted to a YouTube playlist, so you can have access to those recordings. So thank you to everyone for all that you do to make this possible. My colleagues, any comments or additional things you'd like to add before we finish off this morning? All right. Well, thank you to everyone. We appreciate everything, and I hope everyone and your family stays safe. If there's anything we can do for you, let us know, and take care and have a great rest of your week.